The rain hit like punishment. That is the only way I can describe it. The way the sky opened the moment the door slammed shut behind me. The way the water fell in sheets so thick I could barely see the street below the apartment steps, as though the whole world had decided to pile on at once. My blouse was soaked within 30 seconds. A silk one, the ivory blouse with the mother-of-pearl buttons that I had bought specifically because Camille once said I looked elegant in it. Water darkened the fabric from cream to translucent, and I stood there on the front steps of her building, shivering, arms wrapped around my own chest, thinking, she still has my coat. My coat and my phone charger and the small leather notebook I carry everywhere full of fabric swatches and color references, and she had all of it, locked behind a door she had just told me never to knock on again. I had found the messages 2 hours before. Not on her phone, Camille was too careful for that, but on her laptop, which she had left open on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and the name of the woman who had been in our bed 3 times in the past month was right there in the thread, written with such casual warmth that it made me feel like the outsider. Like I was the one who had wandered into someone else's story. They had been seeing each other since November. It was March. When Camille came out of the shower wrapped in that robe I had given her for her birthday, I was standing in the kitchen holding her laptop with both hands. Not threatening, just holding it, the way you hold something you need to understand before you put it down. She looked at me, she looked at the screen, and her expression did not crumble the way I had always imagined the confrontation would go. It became cooler, more composed. She set down her towel and said, "I don't owe you a performance of guilt, Liora." I think that was the moment something broke clean through the middle of me. Not the messages, the calmness in her voice. "You've been doing this since November," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "You've been distant since November. These things are connected." She said it like a diagnosis, like she was explaining a market correction, not ending a 3-year relationship. I told her she needed to be honest with me. She told me I was being dramatic. I told her I wanted my things. She told me it was her apartment and her timeline and that I could come back for them tomorrow. When I had calmed down and stopped acting like I was owed an explanation for her choices. "You are standing in my kitchen," she said, making a scene. There was no scene. There was just me, holding a laptop, asking for honesty, and a woman who looked at me like I was an inconvenience she had already mentally filed under resolved. I set the laptop down. I picked up my bag. I said, "Then I'm going," and she let me go. She actually held the front door open herself, one hand extended in a hostess gesture so fluid it might have belonged at a dinner party, and then the door closed behind me and I heard the deadbolt turn. That was when the rain started. I stood on the steps of her building, the expensive building in the expensive part of the city, the kind of building with a marble foyer and a doorman who always called me Miss Bennett, with exactly enough warmth to be civil and exactly little enough to remind me I was a guest. And I tried to think where to go. My friend June lived 40 minutes away. I had no phone charger and 14% battery. It was past midnight. The storm had no interest in my problems. I stepped down to the sidewalk because I couldn't bear to stand at her door another second, and the rain closed over me like a verdict. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for my hair to plaster to my face. Long enough for my shoes to fill with water. Long enough to feel something underneath the grief and the anger that I can only describe as recognition. The quiet, terrible recognition that this had been building for months, maybe years, and some part of me had known, and I had stayed anyway, because leaving felt like an admission that I had wasted my best years on someone who only ever saw me as furniture in her carefully staged life. I was good at arranging spaces. That was my work, my gift. Walking into rooms and understanding what they needed, what texture belonged on that wall, what light should fall through that window, how to make a home feel like it was holding you. I had spent 3 years arranging Camille's apartment around her preferences and her moods and her social calendar, and I had not once thought to ask where I was supposed to fit. The cars on the street sent arcs of water across the curb. The building across the road was lit from within, all glass and pale light, the kind of tower that always seemed to exist in a different atmosphere from the rest of the city. Clean lines, seamless angles, a structure so deliberate in its design that looking at it felt like listening to a single, sustained note. I had noticed it before, in passing. I knew it was residential, that the upper floors were private penthouses, that a building like that existed in a tax bracket I only visited professionally. I did not notice the woman in the window until the light behind her shifted. She was standing behind the glass of one of the upper floors. I could not have told you which floor, only that it was high enough that from where I stood she should not have been able to make out any detail of my face. And yet something about the way she stood changed, the stillness that follows a decision rather than a question. I looked away, wrapped my arms tighter across my chest, told myself I was not going to cry on a public street, not for Camille, not tonight. I was still telling myself this when the building's lobby door opened, and a man in a dark coat stepped out holding an umbrella, looked directly at me and said, "Miss? My employer would like to offer you shelter. She saw you from upstairs." I stared at him. "She saw me," I repeated. "Yes, miss." He was already extending the umbrella toward me, already moving to guide me out of the rain, with a practiced, unhurried efficiency that suggested this was not a task he found unusual. "If you'll follow me?" I should have said no. I know that. Any reasonable person standing on a dark street at midnight in a rainstorm would say no to a stranger's driver, telling them to come up to some unknown woman's apartment. But I was soaked to the bone, and my phone was at 11% now, and I had nowhere to go, and there was something about the way he said my employer, not my boss, not the lady upstairs, but my employer, that made me think this was not a predatory situation. This was a structured one. I followed him inside. The lobby was warm, hushed, and smelled faintly of cedar, and something floral I couldn't place. The doorman behind the desk glanced up, nodded once, and returned to whatever he had been reading. The elevator was the kind that didn't have buttons visible from inside. The driver pressed something on a small panel, the doors closed, and we went up. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. I stepped out, and the city came in around me through 3 walls of glass, the storm visible in every direction, lightning stuttering over the skyline, rain streaming in pale rivulets down the windows. The penthouse was enormous and nearly silent, the rain muffled to a low percussion by glass and altitude. The floors were pale marble, veined with gray. The furniture was sparse, chosen with the same ruthlessness as the architecture. Low sofas and dark linen, a drafting table in the corner surrounded by models and rolled plans, built-in shelving along the only solid wall, filled with books and architectural references and a few carefully placed objects. No clutter, no sentimentality, no warmth for its own sake. And yet the space did not feel cold, exactly. It felt precise. It felt like a person's mind made visible. She was standing by the windows with her arms crossed and her back almost to me, and when she turned around, I understood immediately why people found her intimidating. Severine Cross. I knew who she was, the way anyone in the design world knew who she was. Through reputation, through magazine features, through the buildings you recognized as hers before you checked the credit. Because nothing else in a city looked quite like that. She had redesigned a national museum at 31. She had built a private hotel in Iceland that had been on the cover of every architecture publication for 2 consecutive years. She was 40-something. No, I would later learn she was 36, though she carried her age the way a structure carries its load, with no visible effort, and she had the kind of face that belonged on a currency. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, dark hair pulled back from her face with the kind of simplicity that suggested she found anything decorative a waste of time. She looked at me for one moment, the way she probably looked at blueprints, assessing, thorough, clinical, and then she said, "You are not standing in this storm another second." It was not a question or an invitation. It was a statement of fact that had already been decided. "I'm sorry," I said, and my voice came out shaking, which I hated. "I don't know why I came up. I was just, the rain, and There is a bathroom through that door," she said. "Towels in the cabinet. I'll have dry clothes left outside the door. Your bag is dripping on the floor, which is fine." She said it not unkindly. She said it the way someone says a fact. Here is the situation. Here is what will happen next. I went where she pointed. The bathroom was as deliberate as the rest of the penthouse. Large, pale, cold stone underfoot, warm light overhead, no unnecessary objects anywhere. The towels were white and thick enough to wrap around twice. I stood under the shower for longer than was polite, and I let myself cry then, quietly, with the water running over my head, because I knew in that room no one would hear me, and no one would make me talk about it until I was ready. When I came out, dry clothes were folded on the bench outside the door. Dark gray sweatpants and a black long-sleeved shirt, both impossibly soft, both too large. I rolled the waistband twice and pushed up the sleeves and felt, absurdly, safer than I had all evening. She was at the drafting table when I came back into the main room. A kettle was making noise on the kitchen counter. She did not look up from what she was drawing, but she said, "Sit wherever you want, the tea is almost ready." I sat on the sofa nearest the windows and watched the storm. The city below looked completely different from up here. The rain a kind of silk curtain between the lights, the streets like dark ribbons. I had never seen this view before. I had never been in a room this high. She brought 2 cups and set one in front of me, without asking what I wanted, then returned to her stool at the drafting table. She did not talk. She did not fill the silence with performance or concern. She simply drew, and the rain fell, and after a few minutes I stopped waiting to be questioned and just let myself sit. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. The tea was ginger and lemon, and it was exactly what I needed, without having known I needed it. I held the cup in both hands and watched the storm play out across the glass. "You were standing there for almost 20 minutes before I sent Marcus down," she said, without looking up from her drafting table. "I didn't know where to go," I said. It came out more honest than I intended. She did look up then, briefly. The building across the street, the one with the marble foyer. Whose apartment? Okay. I hesitated. My ex-girlfriend's. A pause. She made a small sound that was not quite a response and not quite dismissal. She returned to her drawing. "She locked me out," I said, because it felt absurd not to say it once. I found out she had been with someone else. For months. When I confronted her, she called me dramatic and held the door open. Silence. The pencil moved across the drafting paper in small, deliberate strokes, and I watched her hands, long-fingered, unhurried, completely controlled, and found something in their rhythm genuinely calming. "She kept my coat," I added, "and my phone charger." Severine set the pencil down and looked at me, and something in her expression was not sympathy exactly, but something harder and cleaner than sympathy, something that felt like recognition. "The kind of woman who locks someone out in a storm," she said, "is not the kind of woman who deserves your grief." I didn't say anything because my throat had closed. "Drink the tea," she said, and picked up the pencil again. I drank the tea. I sat with the grief and the rain and the improbable luxury of this woman's penthouse, and slowly, the trembling in my hands began to ease. She worked until around 2 in the morning, occasionally rising to examine the architectural model on the side table, something with many windows and a curved roofline that I couldn't fully make out in the dim light. She had a focused, self-contained energy in it, as though the room and its contents and the rain outside all existed in a separate dimension from the one in which she was working, and she moved between them without disruption. I found myself watching her more than the storm. At some point, she said, without ceremony, "The guest room is the second door on the left. There are extra blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. You don't need to leave before you're ready." "I can't just stay here," I said. "You can, and you will." She said it the way she said everything, as if it had already been decided by some authority beyond argument. "I'm not sending you into a storm at 2 in the morning with 11% battery on your phone." I had not told her my battery percentage. She must have seen it on the screen when Marcus brought up my bag. "You pay attention to everything," I said, and I didn't mean it as a compliment or an accusation, just an observation. Something shifted in her face, a fraction of a degree, barely visible. "It's useful," she said. I went to bed in a room that smelled of cedar and clean linen, And I thought I wouldn't sleep, but I did, deeply and without dreaming, in a way I hadn't slept in months. When I woke, the storm had stopped. Gray morning light came through a gap in the curtain, soft and directionless. I lay still for a moment and let the previous night settle around me, all of it. Camille's face, her voice saying you're being dramatic, the rain, the man with the umbrella, the penthouse, the tea. Severine Cross, drawing in silence while I fell apart, and somehow that silence being the most comforting thing anyone had offered me in a long time. I found her at the drafting table, which did not surprise me. She had the quiet, rooted energy of someone who never truly left a room when they were in it. A second coffee cup sat on the edge of the counter. She had been there when she made it, which meant she had registered the approximate time of my waking without asking. Breakfast was on the kitchen island, pastries from a bakery 3 blocks away, fruit, coffee, orange juice. More than I could eat alone. Exactly enough for 2. You didn't need to do this, I said. I know. She didn't look up. I contacted building security at the address across the street this morning. You can collect your belongings with a documented request. I've had our legal contact draft the letter. It ensures she can't refuse without risk of complaint. You'll have your coat back today. I stared at her. I stopped. You called your legal contact at 2 in the morning? 7 this morning. Marcus delivered the letter by 8. She set down her pencil and finally looked at me, directly and without apology. You are owed the return of your property. The process should not require you to beg for it. I sat down at the island because my legs felt suddenly uncertain. The coffee was already poured. She had known I was awake, had gauged the time it would take me to come through, had poured it at exactly the right moment. I didn't know whether that was unnerving or the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me without being asked. Why are you doing this? I said. She considered the question seriously, which I had not expected. Because you needed it done, she said, and I had the means to do it. That's not an actual reason. Then because someone should. She reached for her coffee cup. I don't rescue people halfway, Miss Bennett. She knew my name. Of course she had. I thought about that while I ate a pastry I barely tasted, and watched her return to her blueprints. She had known my name by the time Marcus brought me up last night. She had paid attention from the moment she saw me through the glass. I told June everything when I got my phone charged. She drove over within the hour, came up to the lobby, and stood in the street outside the building, looking up at the tower with her hands on her hips, while I stood on the pavement beside her. Severine Cross, she said. Yes. The architect. Yes. Liora, she turned to look at me. Her expression was doing several things at once. You got dumped by Camille Drayton and rescued by Severine Cross in the same night. I was not rescued, I said. She offered shelter. In a storm. In her penthouse. Yes. June made a sound I could not categorize and then hugged me very hard, and I let her, because I needed it. She smelled like the lavender soap she'd used since college, and it made me want to cry again, but the better kind of crying, the kind that means you're not alone. The letter worked. By noon, a courier delivered a bag containing my coat, my phone charger, my notebook, and several other items. All of it documented, witnessed, and accompanied by a formal receipt that Severine's contact had apparently insisted upon. I knew what this meant. It meant there was a record. It meant Camille could not later claim the things were lost or never returned. Someone had thought about that on my behalf before I had thought to think about it myself. I spent the afternoon at June's apartment with dry clothes and borrowed wine, and told her everything, and by the end I felt something that I had not expected. Not better, exactly, but cleaner. Like a surface that had been stripped back to the original material. Whatever I was without Camille, whatever I had been before I shaped myself around her approval, I was starting to be able to see the outline of it again. June said after a long pause, "What are you going to do about the job?" I had been doing freelance restoration consulting for a mid-level design firm that had, in the last year, gotten 3 major commissions through Camille's professional contacts. I did not think it was coincidence that those commissions had dried up in the months before our breakup. I thought Camille had been preparing the ground. "I'll find something," I said. "You'll find something," June repeated, in the tone she used when she thought I was being insufficiently strategic. Or you could call the architect whose address you spent the night at. I'm not calling her. She gave you her card. She had. Before I left, Severine had placed a card on the kitchen counter without comment. White, minimal, her name and a phone number and nothing else. And I had taken it because refusing would have been rude. And because, if I was honest, something in me had not wanted to fully close the door behind me when I left. I'm not calling her, I said again. But I put the card in the inner pocket of my bag where I kept things I wasn't ready to lose. I called her 4 days later. I want to be clear that it was not impulsive. I had spent 4 days working through my freelance contacts, reaching out to studios I had worked with before Camille, reviewing what I could actually offer on my own. I had also, on the second day, seen an announcement in a design industry newsletter. Severine Cross's firm, Cross plus Meridian, was beginning interior restoration work on the Aldgate, a 1930s Art Deco hotel in the center of the city that had been closed for 6 years. The restoration was to be managed by their architectural team, but required an interior specialist with experience in period authenticity and material conservation. I had done 3 period restorations. I had a credential in material conservation from a program I had completed before I started working for the firm that Camille's contacts had taken from me. I was, on paper, exactly what the Aldgate project required. And still, I sat with my phone in my hand for an hour before I pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. "Miss Bennett," she said, not a question. She had saved my number. "I saw the Aldgate announcement," I said. "I'm not calling for charity. I'm calling because I have restoration experience in period interiors and material conservation credentials, and I think I can actually do what the project needs. I'm sending you my portfolio by email in the next 5 minutes. If I'm not qualified, I don't want the job." A beat of silence. "I know your work," she said. "I looked at it 3 months ago when we were staffing the project." I went still. 3 months ago? You were attached to Nielsen & Park at the time. I contacted them and was told you were not available for independent consulting. Nielsen & Park was the firm where I had gotten those 3 commissions through Camille's contacts. "I was available," I said slowly. "I assumed as much," she said, and her voice was perfectly even, but there was something behind it, a compression of controlled anger that I recognized because I had heard it that night when she said, "The kind of woman who locks someone out in a storm is not the kind of woman who deserves your grief. Come in tomorrow at 9. The project director will do the formal intake, but the position is yours if you want it." I told you I don't want charity. I don't do charity. For the first time, I heard something that might have been impatience, or maybe exasperation, which on Severine sounded like the same thing. I want the best person for the Aldgate, and you are the best person for the Aldgate. Those 2 facts happen to intersect with your current availability. That is not charity, Miss Bennett. That is hiring. I exhaled slowly. "Liora," I said. "I'm sorry? My name is Liora. You keep saying Miss Bennett like I'm about to sign a lease." Another beat, and then, quietly, "Liora." The way she said it, careful, considered, like she was placing something fragile down precisely where it belonged, made something loosen in my chest. 9 o'clock tomorrow, I said. "I'll have someone park your badge at the front desk," she said, and ended the call. The Aldgate was a building that had been waiting a long time to be loved again. I understood that from the first morning I walked through it. The sweep of the lobby with its original terrazzo floors, the wrought iron elevator cage still intact, the carved plaster cornicing above the mezzanine that had been painted over in some misguided 70s renovation and was only now being revealed again. The building had a personality. It had memory in its bones, if you were willing to listen for it. You could feel in the proportions of the rooms the belief of the original architects that beauty was a form of hospitality, that to give a person an elegant space was to tell them their presence was worth honoring. I had missed this kind of work, the careful, investigative quality of it, researching what had been there before, understanding why certain decisions had been made in a certain era, distinguishing between what could be recovered and what had to be reimagined in conversation with the original intent. It required a kind of empathy that I had always found natural, listening to what a room was trying to say. Severine's approach to the structure was technically flawless and architecturally magnificent, but I could see, within the first few days, what the building was missing. She thought in geometry and load-bearing principle. She thought about how light would move through a space in 50 years, how the thermal properties of the windows would behave in an aging climate. She was right about all of it, and the space still needed something she could not give it. The warmth of habitation, the sense that it had been chosen and loved, that someone had cared about how it would feel to stand inside it and be held by it rather than merely housed. We had our first real argument in the second week. It was about the lobby's main color palette. She had specified a cool gray-green for the restored plaster walls, historically defensible, aesthetically precise, and deeply unwelcoming. I had sourced archival photographs from the 1930s that showed the original walls in a warm ivory gold. It was, in my professional opinion, not a subtle distinction. The cool tones read better under this light temperature, she said. The cool tones make the lobby feel like a doctor's office, I said. The original architects chose warm ivory because they understood that a hotel lobby is the first thing a guest feels when they walk in from the street. Geometry isn't enough. The room has to want you. She looked at me over the rolled plans spread across the temporary work table. Rooms don't have wants, she said. They have effects, I said, which is the same thing. Something shifted in her expression. Not agreement, exactly, but the narrowing of focus that meant she was actually thinking about it rather than dismissing it. Show me the archival material, she said. I showed her. She studied it for a long time, moving between the photographs and the current sample boards with the absolute focus she brought to everything. She crouched to examine the terrazzo floor sample at close range, then stood and looked at the photographs again. I had the sense she was conducting a private argument with herself, that she would not narrate until she had reached a conclusion. Order the ivory gold, she said. I did not say I told you so, but I did allow myself, in the privacy of my own thoughts, a small, sharp feeling of satisfaction. This is how it went between us for the first several weeks. Disagreement and resolution. Challenge and revision. She would specify something with architectural logic, and I would push back with human feeling. And more often than not, we found the answer somewhere in the space between. The team that worked under us, project managers, junior architects, restoration specialists, tradespeople, began to joke that you could tell when Liora and Severine had been arguing because the room got better. I noticed things about her the way I noticed things about buildings, slowly and then all at once. The way she took her coffee. Black, no sugar, always at exact intervals, never while walking. The way she moved through the Aldgates construction zones. Hard hat, dusty boots, a kind of kinetic authority that made every person in the room instinctively straighten up. The way she spoke to the restoration tradespeople, concise, respectful, specific, as though their expertise genuinely interested her, because it did. The way she sometimes went quiet in the middle of a conversation and stared at a wall or a ceiling for 30 seconds, as though working through a calculation, and how no one on the team ever interrupted those moments, because they had learned that what came out of them was usually right. The way she looked at me sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching. It was one evening in the 4th week, after the rest of the team had gone home and I had stayed to finish cataloging the cornicing reference photographs, that she came back to collect a set of plans she'd left on the table. She stood in the doorway of the mezzanine for a moment before I noticed her, and when I looked up, she was watching me with an expression so undefended that it took me a second to recognize it on her face. Something open, something close to hunger. It was gone by the time she crossed the room, replaced by the usual controlled neutrality, and she picked up the plans and said, "You've been here since 7 this morning." "The cornicing references aren't going to catalog themselves," I said. "Go home, Liora. 15 more minutes." She made the sound that I had come to understand was her version of reluctant agreement, a small exhale through the nose, and settled herself against the wall with the plans under her arm, and we stayed in the mezzanine in companionable silence for another half-hour, while I finished the catalog and she reviewed the plans by the light of the work lamp, and it was, I thought, the most comfortable I had been in any room in years. That was when I understood I was in trouble. Not the acute trouble of the storm, Not pain and loss and the slamming of a door. The slower trouble. The kind that comes from realizing you have started to want something you didn't plan to want, and now every room you walk into looks different because she might be in it. She had a way of standing in a doorway that I found specifically difficult. One hand on the frame, her weight shifted slightly to one side, her eyes moving through the space with that appraising intelligence, and something in the line of her at rest that was unlike her in motion, softer at the edges, as though when she was still, she forgot briefly to armor herself. I had started avoiding the moments when I might see it happening, because the alternative was staring, and I was not going to stare. June saw it at dinner the following Friday. "You're doing the thing," she said. "I'm eating a salad," I said. "You're describing her blueprint technique with the same voice you used to describe the ocean on your trip to the coast 3 years ago." I put down my fork. I was explaining the technical methodology. "Liora." June leaned across the table. "You said she makes precision look like something worth loving." I had said that. I had been talking about her approach to structural restoration, and I had said that, apparently, out loud. "It's professional admiration," I said. "Professionally admired people don't make you look like that." "Like what?" June smiled, quiet and warm, and a little sad, the way she looked when she was right about something. "Like you've been living in a house with the lights off and someone just opened the curtains." I drove home and sat in my small apartment with the lights off, and thought about that for a long time. I thought about Camille, not with the grief I had felt in the storm, but with the cooler clarity that comes after grief begins to settle. I thought about what I had accepted over 3 years in that relationship. The subtle dismissals, the way my work was interesting to her when it was useful to her image, and invisible when it was not. The way she managed my access to her life in portions that kept me always slightly hungry. I had called that love. I had called it privacy, maturity, the natural reticence of a self-possessed person. I had made excuses for all of it, because the alternative was acknowledging that I had given 3 years of my life to someone who had never once made space for me to fully exist in hers. And then I thought about Severine, who had made space for me in her penthouse at midnight in a rainstorm, and had not once made me feel like I was occupying it wrongly. Camille called the following week. I had been expecting it, in the way you expect rain in a season already wet. Not surprised, just braced. She called on a Tuesday at midday, and when I saw her name on the screen, I stood still for 5 full seconds before answering. "I've been thinking," she said. Her voice was the one she used when she wanted something. Low, careful, with the texture of an apology that had been edited until all the accountability was excised. "We said things in the heat of the moment. You locked me out in the rain, Camille." "I know." I overreacted. She let the pause breathe. "I'd like to talk, properly, in person." I looked out the window of my apartment. The street below was ordinary and wet from last night's rain. I thought of the storm, the marble steps, the driver with the umbrella. Severine's voice. "You are not standing in this storm another second." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "You're staying at Cross's project now." There was a shift in her tone, controlled but with something sharp underneath it. "That's fast." "It's a professional position." "Is it?" Not a question. "Yes." I kept my voice even. "Is there something you actually want, Camille? Or did you call to audit my employment?" She called twice more that month. The second time she said she'd heard I was doing exceptional work at the Aldgate, and that she was glad for me, in a way that made it clear she was not, and that she'd heard Severine Cross was difficult to work with, in a way that made it clear she was hoping I'd confirm it. The third time she said she wanted to explain herself, that there were things about the last year I didn't understand, that she had felt alone in our relationship for a long time. I listened. I even felt something, not the grief, which had become manageable, but a kind of distant compassion for the story she told herself about what had happened between us. I did not tell her she was lying. I did not tell her she was right. I said I hoped she found what she was looking for, and ended the call, and I felt, as I put the phone down, that something had finally been set down that I had been carrying too long. Severine was in her penthouse office when I told her about the calls. I had gone up to review the schedule for the coming fortnight, and had ended up, somehow, sitting on the low sofa while she stood at the window with a glass of water and listened to the whole of it. She was wearing the dark shirt she favored in the evenings, the sleeves pushed to the elbows, and she listened with the total attention that she brought to structural calculations, still, focused, giving nothing back until she had all the information. "Do you want to go back to her?" she asked. No judgment in the question. Just the question, direct and clear. "No," I said. "I think I finally know what I was doing in that relationship, and I don't want to go back to doing it." She turned from the window. "What were you doing?" I thought about it honestly. "Trying to earn something that was never going to be offered," I said, making her space beautiful because she never made room for me in it. She was quiet for a moment. The city moved behind her through the glass, its usual indifferent motion. Then she said, "I know that particular architecture." Something in her voice, not softness, which was not a word I could easily apply to Severine, but an undercurrent, a depth. I looked at her, and she was already looking somewhere else, and I had the feeling she hadn't meant to say it, or had said it at a volume she hadn't intended. "Severine," I said. She turned back, and her expression was the closed and precise face she usually showed the world. But for just a second, before it resettled, I had seen something else, something that looked like the same loneliness I recognized in myself, a tiredness beneath the competence, the particular exhaustion of someone who has built so many beautiful things and come home alone to all of them. "The schedule," she said. We went back to the schedule, but I thought about what she had said for a long time afterward. The gala was in mid-April. It was an industry event, design, architecture, development, the kind where everyone who mattered in those worlds arrived in expensive clothes and stood in a building that demonstrated their taste and talked about projects that demonstrated their importance. The Aldgate was one of 3 featured restorations in a presentation segment, which meant Severine and I would both attend. It was the first public event where we would appear in a professional capacity together, and I bought a new dress for it. Deep blue, simple, good, and told myself the fact that I was thinking about what she would think of it was irrelevant. She had said nothing about it when we arrived, but she had looked at me for precisely 1 second longer than necessary when we met in the lobby, and I had decided to consider that a sufficient response. Camille was there. I should have expected it. She moved in these circles. She always had. It was one of the things that had initially drawn me to her, the way she navigated that world with such fluency, and one of the things that had slowly diminished me, the way she had never quite allowed me to navigate it beside her, only slightly behind. She was standing near the champagne table with a woman I didn't recognize, and when she saw me come in, she did something I wasn't prepared for. She came over. "You look wonderful," she said, and she meant it, which somehow made it worse. "The Aldgate presentation is the centerpiece tonight, apparently. You must be pleased." "It's a team achievement," I said. "Liora." She touched my arm, lightly, and dropped her voice. "I've heard some things about how you came to be on this project. People are saying you're there because of Cross's personal interest. People are wrong." "I don't doubt that you're talented," she said, carefully. "But people will talk, and it doesn't reflect well on you to be seen as..." "As what?" I asked. She looked at me with that careful expression, the one designed to look like concern and feel like a blade. "As someone who uses proximity to powerful women to move forward professionally." I heard what she was saying. I heard the suggestion that the way I had gotten here was not through my credentials or my talent, but through some calculated seduction of a woman who had rescued me. I heard Camille reframing the story of my own survival as a strategy I had employed against her, as though standing in the rain outside her locked door had been a choice I had made for professional advancement, as though everything that had followed had been manipulation, rather than the ordinary grace of one person helping another in a difficult moment. I also felt, behind my sternum, the beginning of the speech I had been composing in my head for months. But before I could open my mouth, I was aware of Severine beside me. She had arrived without sound, without announcement, the way she always did, and she stood at my left shoulder, not touching me, not performing anything, just present. "Camille Drayton," she said, not a greeting, an identification. Camille's expression changed, a rapid reorganization, smoothed over in seconds. "Severine Cross." I was just telling Liora how impressive. I heard what you were telling Liora, Severine said. Her voice was perfectly even and completely devastating. And I want to be clear about something. I hired Liora Bennett because she is the most qualified interior restoration specialist for this project in the city. I know her credentials because I looked at them 3 months ago, before she was available to hire, because I was specifically seeking someone with her combination of material conservation expertise and period authenticity experience. A pause. One beat of silence that felt like a city block of distance. If anyone is confused about the basis on which she is employed, I'm happy to direct them to the project documentation. It's comprehensive. Camille said nothing. Something moved behind her eyes. The recalibration of someone who has encountered a wall where they expected a door. Enjoy the evening, Severine said, and put her hand briefly at the small of my back, just for a second, just to guide me away from the table, and we walked together into the main hall, while something in me felt like a window had been opened in a room that had been sealed for too long. I didn't say anything until we had found a quiet corner near one of the presentation screens. You didn't have to do that, I said. You were about to do it yourself, she said. I only confirmed the record. Still. She turned to look at me, and in the ambient light of the gala, her face was more open than I had ever seen it in public, the controlled neutrality still present, but underneath it, something warmer, something she was allowing to show. She was going to try to make you doubt yourself, she said. I've known women like her. They only stop when the story they're telling is visibly contradicted. Have you known her specifically? A fractional hesitation. I have known the type, she said, intimately enough to recognize the pattern. We stood together for a moment. Around us, the gala moved and murmured. The Aldgate presentation played on the screen above us, photographs of the mezzanine, the lobby, the restored cornicing, the ivory gold walls I had fought for, and I watched Severine watching it, and I saw, in her face, a kind of satisfaction I had only seen in her before, when she was alone with the building itself. The ivory gold reads beautifully on screen, I said. It reads beautifully full stop, she said, and I heard in it the closest thing she had yet said to admitting I had been right. The rain started on the walk to the car. Not the violent storm of March, but a gentler, persistent rain. And when we reached the car, she turned to hand me in, and our hands touched, and neither of us moved for a moment. The rain fell on both of us, softly, and in the glow of the street lamps, her face was very close and very serious. And I thought, here is the moment, and I still don't know what it means. Severine, I said. Don't. Her voice was low, careful. Don't what? She looked at me for a long moment. Don't make me say it in a car park in the rain, she said, and there was something in her voice that was both controlled and completely undone. Then say it somewhere else, I said. She took a breath. Let me into the car, said nothing on the drive back. But in the elevator going up to the penthouse, with the city dropping away below us and the rain making rivers down the windows of the tower, I felt her look at me once, quick, careful, as though verifying something she already knew. And I thought of what June had said about lights and curtains, and I thought that whatever was between us was not nothing, and had not been nothing for some time, and that I was going to have to be the one to say so, because Severine Cross had learned to wait out every discomfort rather than name it first. The penthouse was quiet, dark at the edges, lit by the city below and the dim architectural lighting she preferred. She had not turned on the overhead lights, and neither had I, and we stood in the main room with the rain pattering against the glass and the city glittering below us, and she turned to face me with the look of someone who had made a decision and was afraid of it. There is something I should tell you, she said, before anything else happens between us, because I am not easy to know, and I have spent years using that as a shield rather than a description, and I want to stop doing that, at least with you. I stayed quiet. I was engaged, she said, a long time ago, to a woman I thought understood me. She had grown up in the same world I had, architecture, design, the kind of family where ambition was the only language anyone spoke fluently. We were very similar, I thought. We worked in adjacent fields and we wanted the same things, or I believed we did. She paused. In the low light, her profile was very still. She left, not quietly, in the way that requires the story to be rewritten, because simple departure isn't interesting enough. She told people I had been emotionally unavailable, cold, more married to my work than to her. Another pause. Some of that was true. I won't pretend otherwise. But the version that circulated had me as a monster of ambition and her as a gentle woman who had tried everything. And because I was already known for being difficult, it was an easy story to believe. Did you ever correct it? I asked. No, she said it without apology. I built the next 3 towers instead. I told myself the work would speak. A brief, wry compression of her mouth. The work always speaks. But it speaks about buildings, not about me. I looked at her across the room. This woman who had built the skyline around us, who had spent years turning her precision and her loneliness into architecture, into beauty that held the whole weight of human habitation while she stood outside it. She made you feel like your coldness was the whole of you, I said, not just a defense you'd built. She looked at me quickly, and for just a moment I saw the thing behind the wall, the actual wound, clean and old and still occasionally tender. Yes, she said, quietly. That's exactly what she did. Camille did the same thing to me, I said, in a different direction. She made me feel like my warmth was the whole of me, like I was only useful for how I could soften the things around her. She crossed the room then, slowly, with the deliberateness she brought to everything. She stopped in front of me, and I could smell cedar and something clean, and she looked at me for a long moment with the expression she had worn in the mezzanine that evening, undefended, open, slightly afraid, and through all of it, resolute. I have spent years building beautiful places for people who never stay, she said, and you are the first person who made me want to come home. I don't know which of us moved first. I think it was both of us, and I think it had been a long time coming, weeks of standing close to each other in rooms half-finished and perfect, weeks of touching at the edges of things, of arguments and resolutions, and the slow, careful accumulation of trust. When we kissed, it was not tentative. It was the kind of kiss that knows its own history, that carries everything that was held back in all the moments before it, and her hands were on my face, and mine were in her hair, and the city burned quietly below us through the glass. We broke apart, stayed close. Her forehead was against mine. Liora, she said, and it sounded the way she had said it on the phone weeks ago, careful, precise, like something placed exactly where it belonged. I know, I said. I need you to know, I'm not, she stopped again. The difficulty of it was evident and also, somehow, beautiful. Severine Cross, who spoke in perfect sentences and built structures that held up against the weight of the world, searching for words. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I stopped feeling sorry for you the first morning I watched you argue about paint colors with 3 people at once and win every one. I laughed, a real one, which surprised me. I'm doing this because I want to, she said, and you should know that so you can choose clearly, without feeling indebted. You owe me nothing. I know I owe you nothing, I said. I'm choosing you anyway. She went still for a moment. Then she pulled me close again, and I let her, and the rain ran down the glass around us, like something cleaning itself away. We did not get there all at once. Nothing real arrives all at once. The weeks after that night had a different quality. The same work, the same building, the same schedule, but charged now with the awareness of what we were to each other, which was still being named and still being learned. There were evenings at the Penthouse that ended with us on the sofa reviewing materials together, warm against each other, my legs across her lap while she made notes on a blueprint, and I dozed against her shoulder. There were mornings at the Aldgate where we were purely professional, and the team pretended not to notice anything, except for June, who appeared once for a site visit and spent the entire time watching us with the expression of someone carefully not saying something they had earned the right to say. There were moments in between where the warmth between us was private and deliberate and entirely ours. She told me more, over time, in the fractional way she told things, pieces of herself offered slowly, considered carefully, her family, the architecture of their expectations, the way she had grown up in a house where precision was love and emotional expression was treated as structural weakness, something that compromised the integrity of the whole. The years she had spent trying to prove that emotional discipline was the same thing as professional excellence, and discovering, too late, that it had simply made her easier to leave. The way she had built the penthouse to be exactly what she needed, and found that it was also exactly what she had always been afraid of: perfect and alone. I told her about growing up in rented rooms that never felt like they belonged to me, about learning to make beauty in other people's spaces, because I had never been certain enough of my own to try, about how I had loved Camille partly because she had seemed so certain of everything, so clear about who she was and what she wanted, and how I had mistaken that for safety when it was actually its opposite. Severine said, once, in the dark, her hand in my hair, "She didn't deserve the home you tried to make her." "No," I said, "but maybe I was practicing." She was quiet for a moment, and then she pressed her lips briefly against my temple, and said nothing, because she didn't need to. That was one of the things I was learning about her. She knew when language was sufficient, and when presence said more. She had spent years being accused of coldness, but what she actually had was economy. She did not perform feeling. She simply had it, and showed it in the ways that mattered: the dry clothes, the tea at the right temperature, the legal letter that returned my things before I thought to ask for them, the breakfast poured at exactly the moment I woke. Camille had tried, in the weeks between the gala and the opening, to manage the story one more time. She had spoken to someone at a smaller design publication about the project, suggesting that the Aldgate's warmth reflected Severine's influence rather than any specific designer's contribution, in a way that was carefully calibrated to be unsittable as false. When it reached me through June, who had heard it third hand and delivered it over the phone with audible fury, I sat with it for a day. Then I wrote a piece, a real one. I sent it to the editor of the largest design journal in the profession, and I wrote honestly about the Aldgate restoration, the archival research, the material choices, the arguments I had made and won and lost, the specific technical decisions that had shaped the building's feel. I wrote about the cornicing and the ivory gold walls. I wrote about what it meant to give a building back its own warmth after decades of someone painting over it. I wrote it under my own name. I wrote it in my own voice. I did not mention Camille. I did not mention the storm. I wrote about the building and about what it means to make a space that holds people, rather than simply housing them, and the journal published it in their summer issue. The responses came from people I hadn't heard from in years, colleagues who had worked with me before the Nielsen and Park years, restoration specialists who recognized the methodology, a woman in Edinburgh who was working on a similar project and wanted to discuss approaches. The quiet professional rehabilitation I had half hoped for arrived not through anyone else's advocacy, but through my own voice, offered in my own time. June came to the opening and walked through the lobby with her hands folded behind her back and her eyes moving over everything the way she did when something genuinely moved her. "It's wonderful, Liora," she said, and she meant the building, and she also meant something else, and we both knew it. The morning we opened the Aldgate for its first press walkthrough was in June, 6 weeks after the gala. The lobby was as close to its original splendor as we had been able to recover, which was very close indeed. The terrazzo floors polished, the wrought iron elevator cage operational, the carved plaster cornicing revealed and restored above the mezzanine, the ivory gold walls glowing in the morning light as though they had been waiting for decades to be seen again. The chandelier we had sourced from a conservation warehouse had been cleaned and restrung and hung in the center of the lobby, scattering warm light across the floor in a pattern that looked deliberate and also somehow inevitable, as though it had always been meant to be there. I stood in the center of the lobby with my clipboard and my reference photographs and my slightly insufficient professional composure, and I thought, I did this, not alone, but my hands were in this room. My arguments are in these walls. My care is in the color that warms the air when you walk in from the street. Severine came to stand beside me. She was wearing the dark jacket she always wore to important events, and her hair was pulled back and she smelled like cedar and something clean, and she looked at the lobby with the expression I had come to understand was her version of happiness, focused, still, privately radiant. "The room wants you," I said. She turned, looked at me. "I believe that's what you said rooms do," she said. "I was right," I said. "Weren't I?" Frequently, she said. Don't let it go to your head. I did not say anything, but I took her hand, there in the lobby of the Aldgate, quietly, without announcement, and she let me, and her fingers closed around mine with the same precision she brought to everything. Nothing wasted, everything intended. That evening, after the press had gone and the team had celebrated, and the Aldgate had stood quietly in its new old self in the summer dusk, Severine drove us back to the Penthouse, and we stood at the windows and watched the city settle into night. She opened a bottle of wine I had never seen before, and poured 2 glasses and handed me one, and we stood at the glass in the silence we had become very good at sharing. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "I'm thinking about the last time I stood on that street," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the building across the road, which was still visible, ordinary, lit from within, its marble foyer unchanged and irrelevant to me now, in the rain. And I looked up at this building because it was lit, and it was beautiful, and it seemed like it existed in a completely different atmosphere from where I was standing. "And now," she said. "Now I live in it," I said. She turned to look at me. I had moved a few things over in the months since the gala. Not officially, not all at once, but gradually, the way things settle when they are where they belong. A plant on the windowsill, because Severine said plants made her think of maintenance, and I said they made me think of something choosing to grow, and she had let the plant stay, and had, I noticed, been watering it when I wasn't there. A sketch on the kitchen counter. My good knife and her knife block. A blanket I liked over the back of the sofa. 3 of my reference books on the shelf beside her architectural ones, which she had moved to make room for without comment. A small ceramic vase that I had found in the basement of the Aldgate among the original fixtures, which the project lead had said I could keep, and which I had brought here because the light caught it in the mornings and I had thought immediately of her. The penthouse was warmer than it had been, not temperature. It had always been physically comfortable, but the quality of the warmth was different. Something lived here now. "I have a proposal," Severine said. "That sounds formal," I said. "It is, slightly." She turned fully toward me. "I have been offered a commission for a private cultural foundation in the South. They want a complete estate redesign with interior restoration of the main house. It's a 3-year project, significant resources, creative latitude." A pause. "I want you as the lead interior designer, jointly credited, not a subcontractor, a partner." I looked at her. "That's a professional proposal." "Yes." "Only a professional proposal?" She set down her wine glass and looked at me with the expression she had when she was deciding how honest to be. And then she chose honesty, the way she increasingly chose it, the way I was learning she would always choose it when the alternative was pretending to feel less than she did. "I want you with me," she said, "in every possible sense of that. On the project, in this penthouse, in my life, which I have been told by several people is not easy to share, and which is nevertheless what I am offering you, because you have managed to make every room I put you in feel like somewhere I want to stay." Outside, the summer rain began. Light, this time, barely more than atmosphere, a breath of water across the glass, the city going soft and brilliant in the wet. The plant on the windowsill was backlit by it, its leaves translucent and green. I thought about March, about silk soaked through on a dark pavement, about standing in the rain without a coat and not knowing where to go, about how sometimes the worst moments of your life are also the door that opens. I thought about what I had learned, in all the months between that storm and this one, about the difference between making yourself smaller so that someone else doesn't feel uncomfortable, and making yourself clearer so that someone else can really see you. About how the home I had always been trying to create in other people's spaces had been waiting for me to understand that it was not a place you found, but a feeling you built, with the right materials and the right person beside you who trusted you to know what the room needed. "Yes," I said, "to all of it." She came to me then, and I went to her, and we stood at the windows while the rain ran down the glass and the city shimmered below us, and I felt the kind of safety that has nothing to do with shelter, the kind that comes from being fully known by someone and chosen anyway, the kind that doesn't need a locked door because it doesn't need to keep you in, the kind that trusts you to stay because you want to. I thought of Camille's deadbolt sliding home and me standing in the rain on the wrong side of it. I thought of Severine's voice through a lobby that smelled of cedar. You are not standing in this storm another second. Some doors close to protect the person inside. Some doors close to protect themselves. And some doors, the ones that matter, are the ones that open. The ones that find you in the storm and let you in. And mean it. And hold. I was inside. Now. I was warm. I was wanted. The rain fell on, soft and silver, and entirely outside of me, and Severine held me in her arms in the home we were making together, and I understood, finally and completely, that the night my ex had locked me out had not been the night I lost everything. It had been the night I found the door I was always meant to walk through.